Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is that you are watching this video. I am uploading this video as supplement or support material to our module pertaining to Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. So for this particular module, our objectives are the following. At the end of this module, you should be able to enumerate the different levels of objectives in the three domains. Give examples of behavioral terms in each of the levels of objectives in the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains. And lastly, to use the behavioral terms in formulating examples of instructional objectives. Okay. So our topic for this particular module is identifying and articulating learning objectives. This taxonomy, when we say taxonomy, it's just a fancy word for classification. This taxonomy is generally accredited to Benjamin Bloom, but actually he had collaborators when they created this framework for educational objectives. He worked with Max Engelhardt and Edward First, and also Walter Hill. And it even included David Krathwohl. No? So he did not work on this alone, but as already mentioned, this is usually attributed to Benjamin Bloom. And the Bloom's taxonomy has been used by teachers for many years, no? Kasi nagawa ito nila, itong framework na ito was in 1956. So starting that year, when their work was published, this was already used by teachers all throughout the world, particularly in the construction or formulation of educational objectives. Yung paggawa ba ng mga objectives. I think we have already discussed why it is important to write or formulate the correct educational objectives. No? When a teacher writes a lesson plan or a syllabus, the first thing he thinks of are the objectives. Yun ang unang-unang sinusulat, because the objectives will give direction to everything else. The objectives will determine the teaching methodology, the approaches, the strategies. The objectives will determine the content of the lesson. The objectives will determine the activities or learning experiences. The educational objectives will determine the kind of assessment that will be employed by the teacher at the end of the lesson. So it is important that we frame, we create, we write, we formulate the correct objectives. Okay, so in terms of educational objectives, Benjamin Bloom and his associates classified this into three big domains. Taxonomy is just a fancy word for classification. Domain is just another word for area. So pag sinabing learning domains, we are simply referring to learning areas. And when we speak of learning areas, there are three domains or areas of learning or objectives, namely cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. And each domain is composed of specific skills. There are skills, attitudes, and values which are presented in a hierarchy or levels. Each of these domains has its own hierarchy. It has its own hierarchy. Okay, so the framework crafted or created by Bloom is also a hierarchy, beginning from the simplest cognitive task to the most difficult or the most complex. Mamaya madadaanan natin kung ano yung mga cognitive tasks na yan, particularly in the cognitive domain. Itong cognitive domain, this refers to knowledge, no? Knowledge. Cognitive, pertaining to the mind, pertaining to how we think, how we process information, cognitive. Affective, itong affective domain, this refers to our feelings, emotions, appreciations, attitudes, no? Psychomotor, on the other hand, refers to body movements, body coordination, no? So, sa tatlong areas na yan, each of these three domains or areas has its own set of educational objectives. And these educational objectives are classified into categories. And the categories are arranged in a hierarchy, as you will see shortly. No? As already mentioned earlier, this taxonomy of objectives was created or formulated by Benjamin Bloom and his associates in 1956. But in 2001, this taxonomy was revised. No, this was revised from nouns to verbs, meaning from output to process. From output to process. This taxonomy, particularly the cognitive, the objectives in the cognitive domain, is composed of three levels, as you might have probably seen in the module. I hope you already have copies of your module. I hope further that you have printed our module and you are looking at the module right now as you follow our discussion. So, as you have probably seen in the module, halimbawa sa cognitive domain, its cognitive task is divided into smaller tasks, but they still fall on the task, the level. Halimbawa, remember or remembering. Ito yung na-revise na. So, remember, it is subclassified or subdivided, into recognizing and recalling. Recognizing and recalling are both under remembering. Yan. Mamaya madadaanan natin yan. I'm just trying to give you a general picture of what we are going to discuss here. So, to proceed, let us just go back to our question. Why is it important to focus on these objectives? Well, as already mentioned, they are important. The objectives are important because the objectives will determine everything else that will follow. The objectives will determine the teaching strategies, the learning activities, the learning experiences, the content, the assessment, and all other else. Hanggang katapusan ng gagawin lahat sa klase ay nakabase sa objectives. The objectives will also tell the students what to expect from the lesson. Kaya nga, doon sa events of instruction ni Robert Gain or Gagne, whatever pronunciation you prefer, we place informing the learners of the objectives in the beginning. No? Pagkatapos ng gaining their attention, we inform the learners of the objectives so that they will know what to expect from the lesson. And another one is that instruction, meaning teaching, as well as the materials, the learning experiences, the strategies, the content, will all be aligned with the assessment strategies. So lahat sila ay mag-align, hindi sila skewered. Okay, so ganun yung kahalagahan ng educational objectives. So let us proceed. Ito ngayon yung mga levels, no? Cognitive domain, Bloom et al. So you see, et al. Hindi lang si Bloom, no? So 5 yata sila or 6. In 1956, gave us these domains of thought processes. These are cognitive tasks. These are tasks for the mind. These are tasks for the brain. Cognitive. Yan. So, yung original taxonomy ay itong nasa left side. Knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. That was the original taxonomy. And for each level of cognitive task, Bloom and his associates gave a list of behavioral terms that can be appropriately used for such level. Sa knowledge, mayroong mga behavioral terms. Behavioral terms are the verbs teachers use in formulating educational objectives. We are advised to be specific, to be exact in the use of these behavioral terms so that we can easily measure learning at the end of the lesson during assessment, no? Kasi pag hindi clear, we will not know what to measure. Halimbawa, the word no is not considered behavioral. Kasi nga, it's not specific, it's not exact, no? Halimbawa, sa science, objective mo is, at the end of the 90-minute period, the students should be able to know the solar system. The word know is very, very broad. What is, may tuko. Sumingit pa yung, goynag. At, you do not know, I don't know if you heard that, pero ako dinig ko yung lizard. You do not know what exactly to measure during assessment. Kasi yung objective mo is, at the end of the lesson, the students should be able to know the solar system. Ano eksakto ang meaning ng no? What is it exactly that you want them to be able to do at the end of the lesson? So yung no is not behavioral. Pero pag sinabi mo, at the end of the lesson, the students should be able to enumerate the different planets in the solar system. So the term enumerate is behavioral because it expresses an exact action that will enable the learner to exhibit or manifest or show or demonstrate his knowledge and will enable the teacher to measure the extent of knowledge acquired. So pag na-enumerate niya yung lahat ng planeta, if he is able to enumerate all the planets, then his learning in terms of that particular objective is 100%. Kung kalahati lang, ay di 50% yung kanyang learning. See? That is how important it is to use behavioral terms. So yung binibigay sa atin ng mga enumerate, label, these are all examples of behavioral terms. Galing yan ka na Bloom. So there is a specific set of behavioral terms for knowledge. There is a specific set of or list of behavioral terms for comprehension, for application, for analysis, and so on and so forth. So that was in 1956. In 2001, these terminologies on the left side, knowledge, comprehension, blah, 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 hanggang evaluation, were changed with remembering. So knowledge became remembering. Comprehension became understanding. Application became applying. Analysis became analyzing. Synthesis we can no longer see. Evaluation went down one step or one notch lower, and then creating followed. This was the revision done in 2001. It was only during this time that the subcategories were introduced. The subcategories were introduced. So yung remembering, dati knowledge, siya lang. There were no subcategories. Now, in the revised version, remembering is subdivided into smaller categories. So under remembering, meron pang recognizing. So there's a separate set of objectives or behavioral terms for that. Recalling, yung word na recalling, there is also a specific set of behavioral terms for that. But recognizing and recalling are both under remembering. Ayan. Sa understanding naman, mayroong mga subcategories like interpreting, exemplifying, classifying, summarizing, inferring, comparing, explaining. Sa applying, meron ding mga subcategories. Ganon din sa analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So you will not see these subcategories in our module because I really intended to just mention them during our discussion. No? So if you like, I can easily upload this additional information into our group chat so that you can also access this information. So madali na lang itong ihabol if you want, no. So let us proceed. So the whole point here is that the taxonomy, the classification of objectives in the cognitive domain was revised. So knowledge became remembering. So the emphasis was from product to process. The process is remembering. The product is knowledge. When we remember something, that will result to knowledge. If we understand something, that will result to comprehension. So that's the shift there, from product to process, from noun to verb. So learning in current pedagogical practices, in modern or current educational practice, both learning and teaching have shifted from product to process. Kasi importanteng maintindihan yung proseso of remembering, understanding, things like those. Pero lahat yan ay mapupunta sa knowledge, comprehension, application. So, pareho lang din yung ginamit na mga behavioral terms, only that in the revised edition, in the revised taxonomy, remembering, understanding, up to creating were subdivided into smaller categories as already mentioned. And each subcategory has its own set of behavioral terms. Bibigay ko sa inyo itong list na ito. No? I will upload this into our group chat. Okay, para ma-access din ng iba. Let us proceed. So, the first of these, di ba ako lumampas? Hindi naman pala. The first of these objectives are those that fall under the cognitive domain. Those that fall under the cognitive domain. And as you can see, the cognitive domain is composed of 6 categories or levels, if you like. Remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Okay, let's talk about this one by one. Let's start with remembering. Kung saan nakatutok yung gray area, yun ang pinag-uusapan ha. I hope you can see this in the recorded video afterwards. So, remembering is a cognitive task which requires recall, Yung aalalahanin natin, meaning to retrieve from memory something that is there. Yan. It requires recall or remembering of prior learned materials in terms of facts, concepts, theories, and principles. It is the lowest cognitive level. This includes memorizing and recognizing factual information. This is the lowest cognitive level. This is the easiest thing to do. It requires the least effort on the part of the learner. All the learner needs to do is to recall from memory something that is being asked. Mga tanong na, what is the capital of this particular country? What is the capital of Czechoslovakia? O yan. Pag naalala niya, Sir, Prague. O, hindi tama yung kanyang pagkaka-remember. So, he was able to recall the correct information from memory. That's remembering. Who are the characters in the story we took up yesterday? Pedro, na-memorize niya lahat, na-recite. That's remembering. Where did the story happen? Juan, naalala ulit. That's remembering. So, it's very easy. It's easier, than understanding, applying, analyzing, and so on and so forth. That is why it is called the lowest cognitive level. It's easy to enumerate and simply recall the characters of the story, say for example, than to explain the relationships among the characters that will already be under understanding. So, dito sa remembering, all the learner needs to do, all he has to do, is to recall from memory or to retrieve an information that is in his memory. Yun lang ang kailangan niyang gawin doon. Hence the description that remembering is the lowest cognitive level. So, examples of this are quoting phrases from memory, reciting safety rules, and the examples of behavioral terms we can use in formulating or in writing behavioral terms for remembering are the following: define, describe, identify, know, label, list, match, name, outline, recall, recognize, reproduce, select, state. Yeah. Say for example, all you want to do for this particular meeting is for the learners to recognize the different parts of the microscope. So in your objective, in your lesson plan, you will have an objective such as at the end of the, say, 60-minute period, the students should be able to label the different parts of the microscope. Kunyari, ang iyong evaluation ay, you will show them a drawing of a microscope and let them label its part. Let them name its part. So you see, all they need to do to accomplish that task is to recall from memory which one is the parang kalimutan ko yung mga parts of the microscope. Slide, the part where we put the slide, what do you call that? Slide holder? Whatever. So, the point here is that all he needs to do is to label or name its part. So, hindi niya i-describe, basta pangalanan lang. So, that's remembering. Labeling, giving names, making lists. List all the countries in Southeast Asia. See, that's remembering. At the end of the lesson, the student should be able to enumerate or enumerate the different member countries of ASEAN. Yan. So you see, wala siyang gagawin doon but to remember or recall from memory what is being asked. So that's remembering. during introductory meetings, first meeting, second meeting, usually we focus first on remembering, no? Because at this point, we are only introducing terminologies to our students. We are introducing new concepts. And that is why we use the objectives that fall under remembering. If they are already familiar with the terminologies, the concepts in the subject or the topic, then we proceed to understanding, applying, and other higher cognitive tasks. Yung tinatawag na HOTS, HOTS acronym, which stands for Higher Order Thinking Skills. Yan. Ang sabi ng DepEd, we should focus more on HOTS. We should focus more on higher order thinking skills. Meaning, we should not always focus on memorizing, labeling, naming, enumerating. No? Siguro sa umpisa pwede yun. Kasi nga, as already mentioned, we are introducing new terminologies, new concepts. But as we go, wag naman hanggang matapos yung academic year, puro memorizing. Still remember our lesson about meaningful learning and rote learning? There's no point in memorizing things without really understanding them. So, in the beginning, we can probably focus more on remembering because, well, they need to be familiar with the meaning of terminologies, they need to be familiar with the concepts. Yan. So, puro remembering lang muna, puro enumeration, puro labeling, puro naming, puro listing. Then, on the second or third meetings, depending on your lesson, then you proceed to higher level cognitive processing, understanding, applying. Halimbawa sa English, sa literature, no, hindi naman pwedeng puro enumerate the characters lang. You will really come to the point that you will need to analyze the story. You will need to understand the relationships between the different characters, applying the formal method in literary analysis, evaluate the actions or the values of the character, or create a different ending for the story. So patas ng patas yung iyong hinihingi sa mga bata, no? More and more complex cognitive tasks will be required from the learners as the lesson progresses. Hindi naman hanggang matapos yung buong chapter, buong ay puros remembering tayo. The learners will understand and learn very limited or acquire very limited knowledge if that will always be our approach. So basta in the remembering level, these are the examples of words or behavioral terms we can use. In addition to this, we can also make use of behavioral terms such as sight. No, sight. C-I-T-E, sight. Define, enumerate, label, list, name, outline. Yung mga ganon. So that's remembering. We proceed to understanding. Understanding requires greater effort on the part of the learner, no? Because understanding something is more difficult to do than remembering. So, say for example in a story sa English halimbawa, no? The learners should understand the relationships among the characters in order to better understand the story. It's not enough that the story involves Pedro, Juan, Marta, Maria, and Petra. It's not enough for them to simply enumerate the characters. More importantly, they have to know or understand the relationships among or between them. So understanding refers to one's ability to grasp the meaning of material. So mas mahirap itong gawin, no? This is a little bit different and more difficult to do than simple recall, than simply remembering materials or information. It indicates the lowest form of understanding. Bakit tayo napunta dyan? Sa lowest form of understanding. And understanding na nga yan eh. Diba sabi natin kanina, every level is divided into categories. So under understanding, merong interpreting, exemplifying, classifying, summarizing, inferring, comparing, and the highest is explaining. Yan. All of them fall under understanding. So, understanding is getting meaning from different bits of materials. If you are able to recite or enumerate all the characters in the story, that's remembering. If you understand the meaning of the relationships between or among them, the meaning of one's actions related to the action of another character, meaning we go beyond simple labeling of name or naming things and their understanding. So, mas mataas siya kaysa sa remembering. At this level of cognition, at this level of mental processing, at this level of thinking, the emphasis is on organizing, describing, and interpreting concepts. So it is higher than simple recall, simply remembering information, simple retrieval of information from memory. Mas mahirap itong ganito. Kaya nga, sa hierarchy, remember, if there is a hierarchy, there is ranking, no? That is why, and that is the reason why understanding is higher in the hierarchy than remembering. Kasi mas mahirap siyang gawin. It requires greater effort, it requires greater mental ability, no? From or on the part of the learner. So yan. So let us talk about the different examples of behavioral terms one can use or we can use with relation to or in relation to understanding. So examples of these behavioral terms include comprehend. Yan, pag if your objective is for the learners to understand something, you can use these behavioral terms: comprehend, convert, defend, distinguish, estimate, explain, extend, generalize, give examples. All of these behavioral terms that you see in our screen, which you can also see in your module. All of these are examples of behavioral terms that dami nating sound effects. Ibon naman ngayon, kanina lizard. Okay. So going back, all of these behavioral terms, as I was saying just a while ago, can be used under the understanding level. Yan. Pwede kang mamili lang dyan. Whatever objective will be appropriate for your lesson. In addition to this list, you can also use the words or behavioral terms: approximate, articulate. No? When we articulate something, we express it. No? As if, for example, we articulate our views or our perspectives on something. Clarify, characterize, compute, contrast, convert. These are all examples of behavioral terms you can use for understanding. So, um, going back to what we were saying just a while ago, class, no? One value, one importance of knowing or understanding these behavioral terms is alignment, to establish alignment between objectives and assessment. So let us have a simple example. Sa halimbawa, ako teacher sa English. At the beginning of my lesson plan, my objectives goes like this. At the beginning of, at the end of the period, the student should be able to enumerate the characters in the story. So enumerate falls under remembering. Kasi wala silang gagawin doon, kundi alalahanin lang to recall or remember who the characters in the story are. So remembering. Pagdating sa test, ang aking tanong ay, explain the relationship between the protagonist. Bumalik na naman yung lizard. So, ang tanong ko sa assessment ay, explain the relationship between the protagonist and the antagonist at the beginning of the story or in the story. No? Or to be more specific, maglagay tayo ng mga pangalan. Explain the relationship between, halimbawa, one of the characters is say, Johnny. No? Kasi palagi na lang Juan eh. Si Johnny na naman, baka magalit si Juan. So one of the characters is Johnny, and another character is Martha. Yagalin tong Martha. Explain the relationship between Johnny and Martha. Yun ang tanong mo sa assessment. You look at that class, ha? Your objective is for the learners to enumerate or simply remember the characters. Pero ang assessment, ang tanong mo sa test is to explain. Magkaibang levels yun eh. Enumerate is under remembering. Explaining is under understanding. So, mas mababa yung nasa objective kaysa sa assessment. So, they do not match. They are not aligned. Pwede rin balik rin natin. At the end of the lesson, the objective is, at the end of the lesson, the student should be able to explain the relationship between Johnny and Martha. So, sa yung objective, the level is understanding. Pagdating sa tanong mo sa assessment, who are the characters in the story? So that's very easy to do. So everybody gets 100. Sabi mo, wow, naintindihan nila ang aking lesson. Bakit? Kasi ito 100 lahat, oh. 100 nga because the objective and the assessment do not align. They do not match. Mahirap yung iyong tinarget na skill or understanding. Napakadali ang test. Mataas talagang makukuha. So your assessment now is invalid. You did not measure the extent of learning correctly and properly because you did not follow the hierarchy. If the objectives are in the understanding level, assessment strategies should also fall under understanding. If the objectives are in the creating level, the highest level, then assessment should also be in the creating level so that they will match. The objectives and assessment will be aligned. The objectives and assessment as well as the teaching approaches or strategies, content, and learning activities, they will all be aligned. Lahat sila ay ang target ay papunta doon sa creating because that is what you have in your objectives. Okay. So I hope you can follow, no? I hope you are following me in your module. So ganun 'yon. So going back, understanding under understanding, you have the following behavioral terms to use. Paraphrase, halimbawa, poem. It's easy to memorize a poem, but to understand it and be able to paraphrase it is difficult. So kapag na-paraphrase, meaning the learner is able to state the meaning of a poem in his own words or express some of the lines in his own words, that demonstrates a deeper form of learning than simple recall or simply memorizing the poem. I hope you can see that, ha? Okay, so let us proceed. Applying, ano naman ito? Remembering is recall of information. Understanding is seeing meaning. Applying, as you can see here, is the ability to use learned material in new and concrete situations. Application level of cognition requires that the student apply the information presented, solve problems with it, and find new ways of using it. Sa mathematics palagi natin ginagamit. Applying a certain formula to solve a particular problem. Sa English din, applying a certain method of analysis to analyze a story. Yan. What about in other subjects? Applying a particular method of say, preparing or cooking a specific recipe. Yan. Applying. Applying, what we should remember here is not simple recall of procedures. Applying requires the application. Applying requires putting into action a set of principles. Yan. Kasi kung wala kang i-analyze na steps, ay hanggang remembering lang yun. Step number 1, adobong manok. Tingin sa listahan, maghanap ng manok. Number 2, patayin ng manok. Wala kang ina-analyze but you are just remembering. Applying is much more difficult than that. No? You are given a formula, then you are given a problem. It's up to you now to solve the problem using the formula. How are you going to apply such formula in this particular kind of problem? Applying. Examples of this are using manual to calculate an employee's vacation time. Kunyari, empleyado ka and you have this manual. You are requested by your boss or your employer to calculate an employee's vacation time. See, that's applying. You are using a set of principles. Apply laws of statistics to evaluate the reliability of a written test. That is also applying. Medyo mataas-taas ng level ito, no? Examples of keywords. Itong keywords, ito mga ngayon yung mga behavioral terms that we can use in this level of cognitive task. Apply, change, compute, construct, demonstrate, discover, manipulate, modify, operate, predict, prepare, produce, relate, show, solve, use. Yan. Additional behavioral terms can include adapt, attain, calculate, capture, change. Yan. Pwede rin classify. Meron dito nakalistang classify. Okay. So this all depends on the lesson. So that's applying. Let's proceed to analyzing. This refers to meaning ng analyzing, no? This refers to one's ability to break down material into component parts so that its organizational structure may be understood. This level of cognition, this level of thinking, no? Cognition is just another word for thinking. requires higher level thinking skills such as finding underlying structures, separating the whole into its components, identifying motives, and recognizing hidden meanings. So as mentioned, when we analyze something, we break it down into its components and see how the different parts work together to achieve a specific purpose or a specific effect. Analyze. I'll give you an example. Halimbawa sa short story. Sabi ng teacher, at the end of the lesson, the students should be able to analyze the story. Halimbawa, The Horse and the Yucca. Nabasa na ninyo yung story na yon? The Horse and the Yucca. Wala pa? Wala pa. Sige, yan na lang na. Ano yung familiar sa atin? The story about the turtle and the monkey. Balik tayo doon. The turtle and the monkey. Pwede bang i-analyze yun? Pwede. Short story yun. Okay. So, ano bang ginagawa pag ina-analyze? So, sabi nga natin kanina, when we analyze something, we break it down into elements. Ano ba yung mga elements of the short story? So, a short story has plot. So, you will separate it, meaning you will determine the plot, you will determine the series of events that make up the story. Then, analyze mo yun. A story has characters. So, that's another element. Dalawa na ngayon. Plot, characters. So, you will explain the relationships between and among the characters. A story has a setting. So, tatlo na ngayon yung ating elements. Plot, characters, setting. So, analyze mo naman ngayon. You will explain, you will describe how the setting contributes to the overall effect of the story. And then, meron pang theme. That's another element of the short story. So, ano ang theme? How is it demonstrated? How is it brought out in the story? So, yung apat na elements na yon, plot, character, setting, theme, you will analyze them, you will describe them one by one, you will explain how each element contributes towards the overall effect of the story. So when we analyze, we break down the elements of the short story and then we put them all together again. We break it down into its elements, plot, characters, setting, and theme. Iniisa-isa nating i-describe, i-analyze, and then afterwards, we put them all together, meaning we explain how they work together to create the overall effect of the story. That is the meaning of analyzing. We break down material into component parts. So we broke down the short story into its component parts. What happened? We understood its organizational structure. We understood how the plot contributes to the story. We understood how the characters' behaviors and the relationships with one another contribute to the story. How the setting contributed to the story and how the theme was brought out. So we break it down into its component parts and then we put them all together again. That's how we analyze. Okay. Examples. Troubleshoot a piece of equipment by using logical deduction. Parang disassembly, reassembly. No? You break it down into its components, paghihiwalayin yung mga pyesa, yung mga different parts. I-explain kung ano ang papel nitong part na ito, how it contributes to the overall effect of the machine. And then, you put them all together so that a better understanding, a deeper understanding of their relationships and how they work together will be acquired by the learner. Recognizing logical fallacies in reasoning. What is wrong with a particular reasoning? Halimbawa, isang syllogism. No? That's also analyzing. Because we break down the different parts of the syllogism, and then we analyze each one, and then we show the fallacy. So we analyze, we study, we scrutinize the major premise, the minor premise, and the conclusion. So makikita natin yung fallacy. We put them all together again, and then we say, this syllogism is faulty. It contains a fallacy. Bakit nakita? Because we broke it down into its elements. So, examples of key words, examples of verbs, examples of behavioral terms that we can use in writing instructional objectives under the cognitive domain, under the cognitive area, under analyzing level. Includes the following: analyze, break down, compare, contrast, diagram, deconstruct, differentiate, discriminate, distinguish, identify. Ibig sabihin dito ng identify, hindi lang yung basta papangalanan or label, ha? Kundi paghiwalayin muna niya yung mga parts. Identify the part, explain how it works, explain how it contributes to the overall effect of a machine or overall effect of a short story. Illustrate, infer, outline, relate, select, separate. So all of these are examples of behavioral terms under analyzing. You will notice na yung iba naman pwede naman sa ibang levels. Sabi ko nga kanina, it all depends on the lesson. Alright. Let us proceed. Nandito na tayo sa evaluating, no? Description muna tayo. Evaluating. Anong kanyang meaning? Ability to pass judgment on something based on a given criteria. So when we evaluate, we pass judgment. We weigh, W-A-I-G-H, something. Buko kaling weigh na ating bangon akilohon. Hindi ka magbaoy dilit baskula. Ay, napaway ni sir. Iya kita baskula. Hindi po. Ang ibig sabihin ay, titimbangin ba? Yung bigat ng idea. Yan. May bigat daw ang idea. Ewan ko sa'yo. So, maraming commercials. When we evaluate, we pass judgment on something based on a given criteria. Para kang magja-judge sa contest, singing contest, halimbawa. You were invited to be one of the judges. You evaluate the performance of the contestants based on the criteria. Usually, ano ba ang criteria sa singing contest? Nandyan yung voice quality, timing, mayroon diyang stage presence, mayroon diyang audience impact, at kung ano-ano pa. So you will pass judgment. You will give your rating to the contestant based on that criteria. That is what we do when we evaluate. No? At this level, the learner is expected to make thoughtful value decisions with reference to the knowledge. Value decisions. Say for example, the criteria is whether a character's actions can be classified as say moral or immoral. Pero siyempre, magbibigay muna ng criteria yung teacher what will be considered as moral or immoral. Depende sa kanilang lesson yon. resolve differences and controversy, develop personal opinions, judgments, and decisions. So, by evaluating things around us, we develop personal opinions. Kasi nga, we use our own personal criteria. Halimbawa, we have our own evaluation of, say, the performance of our politicians. Yeah. So we say that some politicians are excellent in terms of service to the people. We say that some other politicians failed in their service to the Filipino people. Bakit na sabi natin na yung iba ay excellent, yung iba ay nag-fail? Because we are using a certain criteria. Ganyan po pag nag-evaluate. So in order to be able to evaluate, we will need a lot of information. We do not just remember the name of the politician. We do not just remember his position in the government. We need a lot of information about him or her in order for us to properly or correctly or accurately evaluate him or her as a government employee. So, dadaan tayo dun sa levels of remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing bago tayo makarating ng evaluating. So, that's how we evaluate, no? We pass judgment based on a criteria. We develop our opinions, and even our decisions. So, ganyan din ang gagawin ng mga bata when we require them to evaluate. They will be required to pass judgment on something, whether it's a story, an experiment, whatever, yung ginagawa sa mga classrooms. But there should always be a set of criteria. Yeah. Let us proceed. Let us talk about the different examples of behavioral terms that we can use to write instructional objectives under the cognitive domain under the evaluating level. Examples pala muna tayo. Select the most effective solution. So you will be given, halimbawa, 4 na solution to a specific problem. The teacher will require the students to choose which one is the most effective. So, para masabi kung saan ang pinaka-effective, may criteria silang gagamitin. No? They will use a specific set of criteria in order for them to declare which solution is the most effective. Bakit nasabing most effective? Kasi nga ibinase doon sa criteria. Parang singing contest nga. Bakit nasabing ito ang pinakamagaling? Kasi siyang may pinakamagandang boses, pinakamagaling sa timing, the best sa presentation. You can really see that he has stage presence. So yun, that's the criteria. So he is declared the winner. Ganon din sa ating mga classrooms. We give the criteria, we let them judge or evaluate based on that criteria. Hire the most qualified candidate. How will you know who is the most qualified candidate if you have no criteria? So gagawa muna yung mga potential employers ng criteria. Educational attainment, work experience, background, things like those. And the best applicant who qualifies, who meets or satisfies the criteria best is the one who will be hired. Yeah. That's how we evaluate. There's a criteria and then we pass judgment. We explain and justify a new budget. The keywords or the behavioral terms we can use here includes the following: appraise, compare, conclude, contrast, criticize, critique, defend, describe, discriminate, evaluate, explain, interpret, justify, relate, summarize, support. Yan. Halimbawa, support the move or the plan of certain sectors in our government for us to shift to federalism. Ayan. Bago siya makapag-express, no, before the learner will be able to express his support, he will have to evaluate first whether federalism has any merit at all. Kung sa tingin niya ay magiging effective form of government, then he will support. If not, ay di hindi niya iso-support. So mayroong pag-judge, no? Mayroong pag-judge based on the criteria. Ano ang pwede mga criteria doon? Benefits it will bring to the Filipino people. It will, if it will bring it, excuse me. If it will be more beneficial to the Filipino people based on peace and order, economy, distribution of wealth, governance, then the learners will support the move. If they do not satisfy those requirements, hindi nila support. So, ganun yun. Ganun din yung nagja-justify, no? When we justify the actions of a person, say for example, we evaluate whether that action is really justifiable or not. Halimbawa, sa kwento na tinake up ninyo sa English, a character left his family to work somewhere else. So, isa sa mga tanong ng teacher, justify the action of this particular character. Why did he leave his family? Is it enough reason for him to earn a better income, a bigger income, for him to leave his family? So, pag na-justify yan ng bata, nakapag-evaluate siya. If he is able to explain well, if that action is justifiable or not, then nakapag-evaluate siya. Because before he can reach any justification, he will need to use a criteria, the criteria given by the teacher. He will need to pass judgment on the actions of the character. So, evaluate yan. Justify, support, summarize, criticize. All of these behavioral terms here. Sabi nga natin, it depende sa lesson. Basta the point is, there's a criteria and the learners are required to pass judgment on something based on that criteria that is evaluating. Eh bakit mataas ng level niya? Sabi nga natin kanina, before we can evaluate something, we need a lot of information. So we need to remember things, we need to understand, we need to apply certain methods in analysis, we need to analyze, we need to evaluate. And then the last is creating. This is the last, this is the highest. Because when we create, we put into application all that is learned in the lower levels. We put together different parts or components to form a new whole. We will create something new. Yeah. That's creating. Examples, composing a song. Ba, mahirap yan, no? Compose a song. Make a drawing about a topic discussed in literature. Halimbawa, a poem, after discussing the poem, the class may be given a portion of the time to set the poem into music. Gagawin siyang kanta, no? And the purpose of the teacher is to, say, enhance the learner's appreciation and understanding of the lyrical quality of the poem. So, sa halip na i-recite lang, pinagawang kanta. Or, discuss a poem, take it up with the class, and then let them compose a song that is entirely different from the poem, meaning they are not going to use the words of the poem as lyrics, but they are going to use a different set of words in composing a song, creating yan. So you see, hindi lang remembering yun, hindi lang understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating. That's creating, that's making something new, putting a new whole, isang bagong kabuuan. The keywords make, produce, write, compose, generate, design. See, all of these behavioral terms imply creating or making something new. Make, produce, write, compose, generate, design. Okay, so going back, these are the different levels of cognitive tasks under the cognitive domain. Remembering, the lowest, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. And as already mentioned, there is a specific set of behavioral terms for each of this level. Bloom's taxonomy gave us a list of verbs, a list of words, a list of behavioral terms we can use for remembering. Binigyan din nila tayo ng words, verbs, or behavioral terms for understanding, as well as for applying, analyzing, evaluating, and finally, for creating. It is now up to us to choose which level of cognitive processing we are going to target in our lesson or in our class. As already mentioned before, we are encouraged to focus more on higher order thinking skills. So pag puros remembering, we can hardly call that higher order thinking skills. We can hardly call that HATS. Puro memorizing puros remembering puros enumerating So pag nag-umpisa tayo sa understanding, pataas, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating, then we shall be focusing on the higher order thinking skills. But as already mentioned, remembering has its own merits. Remembering has its own functions. Sabi ko nga kanina, usually in the first meeting, in the first two, sometimes lumalampas pa, meetings, we focus more on remembering because at this point, we are just introducing new terminologies, new concepts, new ideas, new words to the learners. So they must be familiar with these words and terminologies first before we can proceed to more complex part of the lesson. So later, if they are already familiar with the concepts, if they are already familiar with the terminologies, that's the time we proceed to higher order thinking skills. So pahirap ng pahirap yung mga lessons natin, mga activities, mga learning experiences. Okay? So that's under the cognitive level. But remember, there are three domains. The cognitive domain is just one of those three domains. Meron pa tayong naiiwan na affective domain and psychomotor domain. As already mentioned before, these categories, these domains are divided into categories just like the cognitive domain. The affective domain is divided into categories. The psychomotor domain is divided into categories. But we are going to cut the video at this point because it's already more than an hour. Right now, it's already an hour and 10 minutes. If I record a video that is too long, I might find it difficult to upload this into YouTube. So I will cut the lecture video at this point and then make another lecture video for the affective domain and for the psychomotor domain. No? So we will cut it here, and I am going to discuss with you the remaining 2 domains in another video. So goodbye for now. See you in the next lecture video. Be safe everyone. God bless you.